The wind howled across the plains of Ohio, a low and mournful sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the land. Beneath the cold, gray sky, there was something unsettling about the town of Renshaw. It was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where life moved slowly and predictably. But there was always something a little off about it, a heaviness in the air that you couldn't quite shake, no matter how many times you visited. It wasn't the kind of place where people lingered unless they had to. Maggie had come back to Renshaw for a reason. She hadn't been home in years, not since she'd left for college, chased her dreams, and moved away to find a life far from the small-town whispers. But then, the call had come. Her brother, Alex, had passed away suddenly in an accident, a car crash on one of the desolate back roads near the edge of town. The funeral had been an empty affair. Most of the town's people, though polite, stayed distant, as if they all carried a silent understanding that there was something unnatural about the way Alex had died. The police had claimed it was just an accident, the usual slip of the tires on the slick roads, but Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Maggie spent the night in her childhood home, the house where she and Alex had grown up. It was quiet now, too quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant rattle of a window in the wind. She couldn't sleep, not with the sense that something was moving in the darkness, something beyond the natural world. The house had always felt strange. It wasn't just the old worn wallpaper or the creaky stairs. It was the feeling that, no matter how long she'd been away, the house had never truly let her go. There were rooms she never entered anymore, places she avoided. She hadn't set foot in the attic since she was a little girl, but tonight, for some reason, she felt drawn to it. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as she made her way to the narrow door at the end of the hall. She could feel the weight of her heart pounding in her chest, a nervous anticipation that she couldn't explain. Maggie had always been curious, even as a child, but there had always been something about that attic that unnerved her. Alex had claimed he'd seen strange things up there when they were kids, shadows that moved on their own, low voices that whispered when no one was around. Of course, no one had ever believed him. Tonight, though, Maggie wasn't so sure. She pulled the attic door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. Dust filled the air as she stepped up into the cramped space. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly as if hesitant to illuminate the room. The attic was filled with boxes of old clothes, forgotten books, and family heirlooms, but there was something else there now. A presence. Maggie couldn't describe it, but it was like the air itself had thickened, weighted with the past. Her eyes wandered over the familiar items, her old ballet shoes, a stuffed animal Alex had carried everywhere as a kid, and a dusty mirror leaning against the wall. But something else caught her attention. A small wooden box, barely the size of her palm, sat on top of a stack of books. The box was plain, unadorned, except for a symbol carved into its lid. A symbol she'd never seen before, but one that sent a shiver down her spine. Without thinking, Maggie reached for the box, her fingers brushing against the rough wood. The moment she touched it, a cold gust of wind slammed against her back, as if something had rushed past her. She spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. The attic was silent again. The box felt wrong in her hands, heavy in a way that didn't belong to something so small. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside, instead of the expected trinkets or keepsakes, there was only a single photograph. She picked it up, holding it under the dim light, and froze. The picture was old, faded with age. It showed a group of people, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. But what caught her attention was the face of a man in the back row. He was looking directly at the camera, but his eyes were wrong, empty, hollow, as if there was nothing behind them. And there was something more disturbing. There was another figure, barely visible behind him, watching from the shadows. Maggie's breath hitched. The man in the photo looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. Her pulse quickened. Suddenly, she heard the distinct sound of footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate steps, slow but insistent, as if someone was walking closer, closer. But when she turned, there was no one there. The silence returned, almost too quickly, leaving her breathless. Her eyes were locked on the photo, her hands shaking. She dropped it back into the box, slamming the lid shut. The air in the attic felt colder now. It was as though something was watching her from the shadows, just out of sight. Maggie knew she needed to leave, but the door to the attic wouldn't budge. She tugged on the handle, her panic rising. It was as if the house itself was holding her there, trapping her in the past. The footsteps came again, louder this time, closer, and this time she could hear a voice. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but then clearer, more distinct. It was Alex's voice. "Maggie." Her heart stopped. She turned toward the sound, but there was nothing. "Maggie, come closer. You have to see." The words echoed in her mind. She couldn't tear herself away. She had to know. She had to see what Alex had wanted her to understand. Before she could take another step, a cold hand brushed against her shoulder. She spun around, heart pounding in her chest, but no one was there. She had no choice. She ran. The attic door flew open, and Maggie stumbled down the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She rushed through the hallway, out into the cold night air, the wind howling around her like a chorus of voices. Her mind was spinning with images of that photograph, of the figure in the shadows, and of Alex's voice calling to her from the other side. In the distance, the town of Renshaw stretched out, its lights flickering like the dying embers of a fire. Maggie knew, with a sick certainty, that this was only the beginning. The town had always been haunted by something dark, something that had been watching from the other side of death. And now it was watching her.